amazing!
Oh yeah, Rocket Power. This show had everything. Skateboarding, BMX, inline skating, snowboarding, surfing, street hockey, and everything else that could be done under the California sun. I mean, they had an entire pier built just for a carnival. Rocket Power premiered in August of 1999. Smash Mouth had just dropped All-Star, Woodstock 99 had just happened, Napster had just launched, and the X Games had just had their 5th annual Summer Games. We were approaching the peak of punk and extreme sports. Every kid was hopped up on Surge energy drink and ready to break their ankles on the 3-stair at the skate park. Youth culture was having a moment, and the animation studio Klasky Csupo had caught wind of it. They created a show that you could describe as a period piece. Which I know sounds nuts, knowing that we generally think of a period piece as something based in Victorian-era England. But Rocket Power could also be treated like a period piece. Let me explain why. If you haven't watched the show, or just need a refresher, Rocket Power is about a couple kids, Oswald Otto Rocket, Regina Reggie Rocket, Maurice Twister Rodriguez, and Sam Squid Dullard. The kids range from 10 to 12 years old and are neighborhood friends. They live in a fictional town called Ocean Shores, California. It's based off of Orange County, California, or possibly Oceanside, or maybe more generally Southern California. It's hard to say for sure. You see, in an interview back in 1999, Arlene Klasky of Klasky Csupo stated that she found inspiration for the show from the locals around Orange County, pretty close to where she grew up. She directly calls out Orange County in the interview, which is leaps and bounds away from Oceanside, California. But in the same sentence, she clumps together California beach towns in general. I'd like to point out that the Ocean Shores Pier is extremely similar to the Santa Monica Pier with the large carnival area at the end. The internet seems to be undecided on where the quote-unquote real location of the show would be. Me personally, I think Arlene didn't have a specific beach in mind and just made a generic name in an amalgamation of California beaches. So in Ocean Shores, the kids lived life as locals who grew up doing every extreme sport you can think of, skateboarding and surfing being the most common. The episodes range from ice hockey and snowboarding tournaments to environmental advocacy through beach cleanup.
Hey, look! A rapper for my favorite Freezy Freeze! I sure love Freezy Freezes!
The show was a bop, but more importantly, it captures a time period, which would obviously be the first step in being a period piece. Since the show is supposed to be based sometime in the late 90s, the kids are perfectly situated at the start of the new millennium, often using things like computers and flip phones in a way that kids at the time would have. Now, I'm not saying they were often using these technologies, but I'm saying when they were used in a way that showed how new and interesting these things were to people at the time. They were doing and creating things that weren't easily accessed to a kid or even the average adult just a few years before. Things like Reggie's Zine, which is a self-published pamphlet or magazine used to express the thoughts and opinions of an individual or group in punk culture. Zines weren't specific to the 90s or 2000s, but got a resurgence with the 1990s Riot Grrrl movement that was happening. They were used to discuss the exclusion of women in the punk rock movement as well as gender inequality in the rest of society. Riot Grrrl and the prominence of zines started to fade as punk culture died down going into the 2000s. The whole Riot Grrrl scene is honestly really interesting. But more importantly, a young middle-class, sports-minded preteen like Reggie Rocket would be the exact person to be influenced by this movement. So it makes perfect sense for her to have created her own zine, even if the first issue spits in the face of the Riot Grrrl movement by having a boy on the cover. But that's not the only punk connection present. Skating and punk were almost inseparable at the time, so some of the fashion that was considered punk was also a part of skating. Things like extremely baggy jeans, shorts, and shirts were standard in skating at the time. This oversized style went all the way to the shoes with things like Etnies, World Industries, and other trendy skate shoes of the era. Moving more towards the extreme sports side of the show, we have the late 90s and early 2000s staples like aggressive inline skating and vert skating. Aggressive inline was a 90s staple that didn't really survive past the early 2000s. The decline is often attributed to the cost of entry, danger, and cool factor. I can attest to this because I also tried to get into aggressive inline as a kid. At that time, a pair of skates were the only thing I wanted for Christmas, but it was impossible to find a pair that were new or secondhand in stores, and online they didn't really have kid sizes. But my parents ended up finding a pair for Christmas, which led me to rush outside, tie them up, and find out these skates were extremely heavy. And after falling once within the first 20 minutes of wearing them, I instantly realized why they rarely came in kid sizes and why they were so hard to find. I never wore those again. Now, vert skating is seen in the show pretty much from the first episode. It's there as a beacon of cool and extreme, being one of the most talked about events in extreme sports the year Rocket Power debuted. This was because skateboarding's poster child, Tony Hawk, had just completed the first ever 900. A whole 2.5 revolutions while in the air on a halfpipe. The trick is extremely rare to accomplish, with only 3 other skaters completing it since. This moment put the X Games on the map and sent extreme sports into a frenzy, also turning Tony Hawk into one of the most iconic sports figures of the time. He was so relevant to the scene that Rocket Power gave him his own episode, further tethering the show into the era. The episode Enter the Hawk Tricks starts with the gang watching Tony Hawk skate a vert competition in Ocean Shores. He has a rough run for the day, and newscasters speculate that he has recently quit skating. He's apparently hidden himself away at his secret compound called the Hawk's Nest, which is conveniently located in Ocean Shores. In real life, Tony Hawk is from Carlsbad, California, which is pretty close to Orange County, California if you believe that's where Ocean Shores really is. And it's only 10 minutes away from Oceanside, California if you fall into believing that that's the real location. Honestly, finding that out, maybe Oceanside is the real spot for the show. Who knows? Otto and the team set off to the Hawk's Nest to find Tony. They sneak into the building and find a Willy Wonka's chocolate factory, but for skating. They skate through the puzzle rooms and eventually find Tony Hawk. He tells them that he was never quitting and all of that's just rumors, then allows Otto to shred the bowl with him. This episode aired September 10th, 2001, and conversations about Tony retiring were probably actually occurring at the time, considering he retired from competition skating just 2 years later.
Okay guys, hold on really quick. Keeper of the Tail, I'm sorry to cut you off. I just gotta jump in here. Hi everybody, I'm Sean from DuskTillShawn, and I just have to take a moment to share a few things with you because this specific topic is one that I hold really close to my childhood. Having grown up skateboarding, watching the show, playing Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, this just hits too close to home for me to not need to jump in here. Did you know that the opening intro sequence for the show contains clips from the unaired pilot called Rocket Beach? And of course, in that pilot, the town was actually called Ocean Park, California, and it hadn't really been changed to Ocean Shores yet by that point in production. In those clips, and throughout the show in general, we see this recurring camcorder aesthetic with lots of early digital video editing motifs, and honestly, I just love it. It sets the feel for the show so well in my opinion. It's a shout out to the stylized skate videos of the times that highlighted professional skateboarders. These films were traditionally captured by a cameraman. In the case of the show, it's Twister Rodriguez and a group of skaters who each got a segment in the video, more traditionally called a skate part. Oftentimes, we would see Twister filming Otto's competitions or his tricks and then making edits to show his friends and family. Another thing Twister is shown doing that was also very common in this era was filming more of the lifestyle and behind the scenes moments, giving the videos a slice of life kind of feeling, if you know what I mean. These videos really served multiple purposes. They could be sold, they could be used by other skaters to learn new tricks, they could help spread the culture, which at the time showcased the rowdy punk scene. But they could also be used as a pitch or a portfolio to help up-and-coming skateboarders get noticed by bigger companies and turn pro. Whatever the purpose, these videos defined this era and helped propel skateboarding into the mainstream world. Nowadays, we even have skateboarding in the Olympics. But skateboarding being mainstream wasn't always looked at as a good thing in the eyes of some skaters. You see, part of punk culture at the time was very DIY, anti-consumerism, and anti-commercialism, and I just gotta say, God, I love that feeling of a good old DIY project. It was a really weird time because extreme sports were finally getting some cash flow, but some people saw athletes taking sponsorships from brands external to the culture as selling out, which on one hand, I can kind of see where they're coming from. Back then it was very much so a crust punk kind of thing that was kept very DIY, not necessarily on the down low, but skaters weren't exactly the popular kids back then, so I can see where they're coming from. But on that same note, don't knock somebody's hustle when they blow up and start making money. That's just kind of a crummy thing to do. Anyways, thanks for letting me jump on your video, Keeper of the Tail. I appreciate you, man.
No, Sean, thank you. You're a pillar in the community, and you seeing the potential in my channel means a lot to me. Now, back to Rocket Power. Like you were saying, the show captures concepts like anti-consumerism and anti-commercialism in different ways, one being laid out in the episode Otto 3000. After breaking his board, Otto gets a gear sponsorship, allowing him to get a new snowboard and jacket. But the sleazy sponsor, Dick Shakely, whose name I swear I'm not making up, this was his real name. Dick Shakely only cares about promoting his brand, overloading Otto with gear, making it impossible for him to perform. After Otto fails in the tournament, he gets all the gear revoked and loses his sponsorship. This is how external sponsors were viewed and to some extent still are. Another way the concept of anti-commercialism was shown was through the locals in Ocean Shores constantly referring to the tourists as shoobies. The term shoobie originated in the late 1800s, and it derives from day trippers taking the train to New Jersey beaches, with their ticket price including a box lunch packed in a shoebox. But the show Rocket Power used the term to describe tourists who wore shoes on the beach. Apparently, the term is used widely throughout Southern California beach towns, and it's a way to shun the cultural effects commercialism can have on a local population. The show also channeled the era's anti-commercialism in the episode Home Sweet Home. In the episode, the local small business skate park, Madtown, run by the coolest adult in town, Conroy, is threatened to be overshadowed and run out of business by the new state-of-the-art skate park, Skatopia. At first, the gang is curious, but feels guilty for being interested in it, as they know this means loss of business for their friend Conroy. Conroy is the type of small business owner who doubles as a pillar of the community. He's shown to give individual attention to those who need it, while also staying fair and fun. Later in the day, Otto gets offered some early access passes to enter Skatopia a week before opening day. He uses them in secret until he's found out by the rest of the gang. Eventually, they all end up at Skatopia and think that the park is great, until the commercial aspect of the park starts to take effect. This includes lines, limited use, liability waivers, and overly strict rules that kill the spirit and freedom of skating. On opening day, they end up wrangling a bunch of kids to skate at Madtown instead of Skatopia, basically saying they prefer the personal touch and spirit of a do-it-yourself park instead of a commercial facility. Honestly, the homegrown, do-it-yourself, do-it-for-the-love-of-it life lesson was the most common theme in the show for conversations about going pro in skating. All in all, Rocket Power tracked the peak of extreme sports very closely. For a show that technically never has a date shown in an episode, it stayed pretty consistent with the current figures in the culture. They had Tony Hawk in his peak, and they even had Shaun White in their season 4 episode, The Big Day, that premiered in 2004, which meant that Shaun White had only recently turned pro at the time that the episode was being produced. That's how up to date they were with what was going on in the culture. Time-accurate events, accurate style, representation, and cultural moments are what make me feel like I can confidently say Rocket Power can be viewed as a period piece for the late 90s and early 2000s extreme sports era. Is there a moment in the show that you remember extremely well? Let me know about it in the comments. I'd like to give a quick shout out to DuskTillShawn for helping with this video. Go check his channel out. He's got some great content that you could spend hours watching. And if you made it this far, take the time to drop a like and subscribe. Your support helps the channel grow and it keeps you up to date on my videos. And it makes me happy. See ya.